Hi there, Glocal citizens. Welcome back to the podcast that inspires a borderless mindset around manifesting a new world. I am your host, Florence Adu, coming to you from my own office here in Accra. So you're going to hear the birds chirping. You might hear the dogs bark. We really tried getting the dogs not to bark, but it happens. I'm very excited to be hosting my guest today because she is a filmmaker, she is a director, she is a producer. Let's go right into the bio. She's a filmmaker and lecturer at the National Film and Television Institute and a PhD candidate at the Institute of African Studies at the University of Ghana Legon, both in Accra. She has worked as editor, director, and producer on a number of local and international productions. As a freelance editor, her works include award-winning films such as Perfect Picture by Shirley Frimpong Manso, Chronicles of Odumkrom, The Headmaster by Ernest Kofi Abbeyquaye, Who is Afraid of Ngugi by Malian filmmaker Manthia Diawara, and Freetown by US filmmaker Garret Barty. She is a co-programmer for the Film Africa Festival, London's biggest celebration of African and African diaspora cinema, presented by the Royal African Society. She was also the festival manager and director of the European Film Festival, Ghana. She is the founder and festival director for Ndiva Women's Film Festival, which aims to create artistic platforms for the presentation and preservation of work by, for, and about women. And most recently, she is the director and editor of the documentary film When Women Speak, which is an excellent film and historical perspective about the women of Ghana's independence through the Fourth Republic. Yes. Aseye Tamakloe,
hey,
welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Hello.
Yes, wonderful. So let's get right into it. Where are you from? Where are you local? And what is your craft?
Where am I from? So I am from the Volta region of Ghana, by the sea. So I think I'm from Southern Volta.
Okay.
Keta, Huti precisely. My mom comes from Keta. My father comes from Keta and Huti. And because we are patrilineal, so I'm from my father's place.
Yes.
I mean, sort of.
And you're patrilineal because the Ewe tribe.
Yeah, the
is
Ewe
patrilineal.
ethnic group is
Yes,
patrilineal. Yeah.
Yes.
So we inherit from our father's side, sort of. Yeah. And what's my craft? So, as you just read, I'm a filmmaker. I'm a film educator.
Okay.
Or lecturer, they call it. I curate and program film festivals as well. I also manage my own film festival that I founded in 2017 called Ndiva Women's Film Festival. So really, I'm in the cultural space.
Okay.
Yes, everything film, the screen, conversations about cinema from the African continent and the African diaspora and worldwide, really, because I teach also world cinema, etc. I'm also into African literature, but my forte is in film.
Film is who you are.
But culture is it, so.
Yes, it is. Okay, so tell us more. In doing some research about you and your work, we know that film is a very patriarchal industry quite often, right? And that is part of the impetus for having, the Ndiva Festival and things of that nature. So as a young woman, how did you find yourself on the path to become a filmmaker or a creative, because you're ultimately a creative?
I am a creative. I think growing up, I've always liked the creative space. I've always been intrigued by the screen and what happens there. And I've always wondered how the images came to life. I didn't have a clue what it was at the time. I remember that there are two things I loved: reading and also watching. And so I remember when I was about to start uni, and my dad asked me if I wanted do I have any interest in NAFTI? I didn't know so much about it.
Yeah. Your father asked. So he saw it in you somehow.
So when I was 12, I had won the Commonwealth essay competition.
Oh, okay. Congrats.
So it comes in age brackets.
Sure.
And for globally, I won the first prize.
Wow.
I think the second person either was from Pakistan or somewhere.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so the award ceremony was here in Ghana at the time, attended by the Secretary for Education, Harry Sawyer. I think under the PNDC government.
Okay.
And then the British High Commission at the time. I remember the event was at the Teachers' Hall. And at the time, I wasn't schooling in Accra. I was schooling because my parents lived in the Volta region and were working there. That's where I was when I took part in the competition. So when I came to Accra, I met schools like Northridge, Lyceum, and etc. I was like, I beat them to it. But yeah, so I think that from then, plus, I think he paid a lot more attention to the things I liked. So he didn't even ask me if I wanted to apply to Legon and the others. He just asked that between Legon, Cape Coast, and NAFTI, which one would you? And I said, I'll pick the film school.
Oh, okay.
So I picked it. And then that's where my journey began.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Now, in getting into film, over time, for starters, when I got to film school, the number of girls or ladies was really small. For starters, even the film school itself, film education is very expensive. And at the time also, the school was very concerned about quality, not quantity.
Of the graduates.
So, I mean, even in the diploma era, before we came in the degree, I used to be every 2 years before they took in people.
Oh, okay.
And then when we came, it was yearly, but I remember we were 18 or 19, they always have some odd number.
Sure. Oh, wow.
And even I was going to specialize in editing when I started, and even there was only 3 of us. Total for the whole year group was only 3 editors, 2 cinematographers. That they have a way of pairing the numbers. But I remember the interview lasted for 4 days, 4 different days. Number of people showed up, but at the end, we're just 18 or 19 in the class.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So it's quite competitive.
Very competitive.
Okay.
My colleagues were Shirley Frimpong, Manso, Julieta Santi.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, but we were even with that, it was a strong class where the ladies the number was really small. And it was something that you could see. Whilst we studied further, I realized that it's not just even a problem here, it's a global problem. And even the way representation is, in front or behind, even when we're studying the film history, you're hardly hearing about women. And we found out much later that women did a lot more that they were credited for, etc. Yeah, And it's strange, but till date, unless you go into feminist film studies, where you may have a lot more information in the general film history books, there's still some mute on that part.
Right, yeah.
I always give this example of a book called Film, Form and Culture. I think one of its new editions, not so new, but quite, not the first edition either, where they talk about women in film. They mention a number of women. The very first woman, Alice Guy-Blaché, who did a lot more than she's credited for, who started making films before the famous American D.W. Griffith. And then Ida Lupino, Dorothy Asner, and all those people. But when it came to even black women, Julie Dash is the only person that's mentioned. And all these women I'm talking about get a half page of an A4 sheet, which is really terrible.
No depth, right? You don't understand.
Yeah. And if it's like that, then you know that there won't be any representation from Asia, from Africa,
right,
and other parts. So yeah, all of this, as the years went by, culminated into me taking intentional decisions about working in film spaces to enhance women's stories, to promote, to make more room for exhibitions, to make information more available. So even when I became a lecturer, I started putting out courses for women in film, because when I went to film school, nobody taught me about women in film. I found out myself. Right. And also probably that I worked a lot with women also in the industry, and most of the big doors that were opened for me also were by women. So, and which I greatly acknowledge, and I think that that's also part of how to develop the sisterhood.
Yes.
being there and showing up for others and holding other people's hands and opening doors or windows or frames, whichever way, because there's so much to be done, and there's so much to tell, and there's so much work all of us need to do. We are not dismissing what men have done, but the intentionality of trying to write out women in history has become an open secret.
Yes, exactly.
and we have work to do.
Yeah.
But interestingly, too, when you come to African cinema, or I'm careful saying African cinemas, I try to call it African cinemas because African cinema is still more a Western concept, sort of. Yeah.
Okay, so why do you say that? Just because of the framework of thinking of cinema in an academic-ish way? Is that what you mean?
Sort of, but also that in the beginning, I didn't see it like that. I was also into African cinema, but slowly, when you speak to filmmakers on the continent and the African diaspora, it begins to feel like Africa is a country. So I'm not referring to the there's a blog called Africa is a country, but it's a satire.
Yes.
But that kind of Africa is a country sort of thing, and because I think they're African cinemas, I'm sure they say European cinema too, but the way in which there's some ghettoization of African, So some filmmakers don't mind, others have kicked against it a lot. I teach it, so because African cinema from North Africa is not exactly. Yeah. Of course, there are some universal stories. It's true.
Yes.
But certain approaches, maybe cinema from the West African region, even that varies between French-speaking and English-speaking. North Africa has theirs, which other region? There's the Portuguese-speaking region, African Portuguese, Lusophone, And also all stem from colonialism and our encounters and how cinema came to all of us. I do understand that there was an intentionality about cinema from the continent, that it's supposed to re-conscientize, re-educate, realign, supposed to take us through a learning and unlearning process for us to re-find ourselves because of the issues of misrepresentation. And also that by the time we were done with slavery and colonialism, our self had been damaged a bit, etc. So surely, we understand that there's an ideological part to it also, which I still support because we still have work to do, because there's an agenda from I tell my students every time that no industry, if we take the African filmmakers aside, all other industries have agendas. So there's nothing wrong with we also having an agenda.
Exactly.
If you take your time and you critically read, and I mean reading the film as text, Hollywood, there are many agendas. Many.
Yeah.
So why shouldn't we?
Sure. Yeah. Exactly.
So
exactly.
Yeah, but the only problem we have is access.
So when you say why shouldn't we, and thinking about the different African cinemas, I acutely understand that how film was funded has a tremendous impact because the French funded it in a certain way. I don't think the English funded it as much at all, even as much as, other parts, but the French hugely supported it. And I still, maybe you can kind of share why they're so invested in the arts per se. Maybe it's their romantic, but the French are big. And then I think that why South Africa in particular, has a thriving industry is because their colonization through apartheid lasted so much longer. So you had more people who had small windows of more kind of contemporary-ish exposure, maybe into the 80s, 90s.
The South African case is really very tricky because for a long time, when we spoke about African cinema or cinemas, they weren't really included. People weren't too sure where to place them because of apartheid.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, until much, much later.
Right.
Yeah. And when it comes to Portuguese-speaking Africa, for them, they use film to actually fight for independence as well. It was part of the fight. For the French African, the policy of assimilation was a big deal. So where you were in Ivory, where you lived in Abidjan, but you lived the life of somebody who lived in France.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
Yeah, and the French were really keen on this policy of assimilation. It was, and really, let's be very honest, things are the same till they,
yes,
you know.
It's very true. Very true.
And yes, they were vested because they also made, you see, the British didn't in the beginning see cinema as a viable financial venture. For them, it was about the trade and exporting.
Exactly.
But the French on the other side also thought that film could be a viable venture.
Okay.
You know, so the British really in the beginning were also vested more in documentaries, newsreel. I mean, if you look at
BBC,
the histories, even the histories of how cinema was used in both places. So when you had people making certain kinds of films in the French-speaking countries, you had the British film unit here making films like Mr. Manso Built a House. You know, films about hygiene, the clean, films about how people should bathe their children, films about
indoctrinating.
And then when they wanted to sell tobacco and you know those things, Marlboro, all those were, you know, things they would show before they showed the supposed educational films. And then, you know, like Mr. Manso Built a House, you know, others about how to speak good English. I mean, it was much, much later that there was an attempt to make the boy Kumaseno.
Yes.
You know, even though it had an all-African cast, it had people from the British film unit that became eventually GFIC.
Sure.
And today has become something else.
Right.
Or, you know, work on it, even though it was a Ghanaian story, you know. But until then, the British were more vested in the documentary genre more. And of course, we know Britain. At the time, you wanted them to go, they're going. They're not going to be giving you money to make any films.
Right.
Thankfully, at the time, our first president was very aware of the power of the image. And so had invested money into expanding the film unit that was there. It was said that at the time, it was state of the art. And that he had the possibility of churning out about 12 Hollywood standard films a year. And that was rare in the region because the next thing you found that was close to what we had was in North Africa.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, but you know, the 66 coup happened and then the rest they say is history.
Yeah.
But in that, you know, and then between that and after that, you had other films like the adaptation of Shakespeare's Hamlet. It's called Hamile. It was shot in the north. Yes. Okay. Tongo Hamile, they call it. Is it, what do you call it? Is it a story Nancy told or something? It's very vague. I will come back. And a couple of others. There were a few co-productions as well. Then there was the famous I Told You So, made in 1969 to 70. You know, and then there was also the coming of television. So there was all of those things to deal with. Yeah. But anyway, French filmmaking has always enjoyed a certain funding, but you know, not all filmmakers from that side were also in agreement, because some said that when it came to how the story should be told, he who feeds you owns you, right? So people had to make certain adjustments.
Right.
Also that the revenues, the way in which they were split, etc., then there'll be access. Well, I think one of the many reasons why till date on the continent, African audiences are still strangers to films that are made on the continent, because our distribution links are really weak.
Yes.
So Five Fingers for Marseille is released in South Africa, and if you have Netflix, I think they're on Netflix now, or some other video on demand streaming something, you are not going to be watching it, and you will never see it.
Right. Yeah.
And if a blue kaftan is made from Morocco, you will never get to see it.
It's true.
So in the conversation, I'm actually working on a paper in the conversation about repatriation and reparation. African cinema has come up because our stuff is not here.
Right, it's true. It's somewhere else.
Yeah.
I hadn't even thought about that, but very true. Yeah.
So I'm working on a paper like that, and it's been difficult, and it's actually not so strange, because even if trade, ordinary trade in goods, has been difficult. And then today we form, if it's not AFTA, is this, is that, trying
organizations
to be able
mobilize.
to just trade amongst ourselves. You can imagine film that we have not considered as trade.
Sure.
So you see, there's so much work to be done.
Yeah. Yes, because it's true. Most industry does have some kind of organizing unit, and there are fewer and far between. I know in Ghana, but there's Music Ga, but is there filmmakers? There's a small animators group. I'm kind of familiar with them. But yeah, there's the
Ghana Academy of Film and Ghana Academy of Film and Television Arts, of which I'm a member.
Okay.
But the problem with film also has been political interferences. So politicians over the years have also toyed with that space. So the splinter of groups.
I guess even to now, right? Because you have...
I don't even know why I'm speaking the past tense. Really, yes.
Right, yeah.
Till now, actually, even now, it's even major. So there are all those battles to deal with. But with South Africa, like you said, apartheid lasted way into the 90s. It didn't immediately end when Mandela was released. But South Africa has become the other Europe in Africa, sort of.
Exactly, yeah.
So instead of going to North Africa, which people will have certain mindsets about, because Egypt, Tunisia, Algeria, they have very strong industries. Especially theirs were supported by their states much earlier, Also because, there's a certain generation that, so you remember Gamal, Nasser, Nkrumah, they all had certain beliefs. Sure. So some people who stayed in power a bit longer were able to do certain things. So the North Africa region has a very robust industry. South Africa, but of course, people will still go to South Africa than go to Egypt or Tunisia, for many obvious reasons, whether true or not,
Yeah.
And so South Africa also became the place where there was some sort of, don't forget there are white South Africans who are also in the arts, who are creatives.
Yes.
And so they also tried to create a certain environment.
Right.
And most of them also traveled and came back and knew the best practices and tried to, put all of that out. So things that the way in which other industries outside the continent, especially Hollywood, Europe, etc. And when I say Hollywood, I stay with American commercial cinema space more than even the independent. So they go, they learn, they try to create this could be made from this space, tourism, culture, arts. And so they made it quite friendly, also especially for non-South Africans. So they have these treaties. People come, they shoot, they make really good money. And then also some of their countrymen also benefit. So even by just the structures, there are differences. FEPASI, which is an organization under FESPACO, supposed to be a body that sort of regularized, but Africa Must Unite hasn't totally happened yet.
Sure. So you went to NAFTI, and then you found yourself a graduate, and then how did you now become a part of the industry?
So by the time I was finishing NAFTI, I was already working.
Of course, yeah.
In industry, which is common.
And that's quite common for NAFTI graduates.
Yeah, very common, because by the time you're in your second year, you start engaging with the industry. You get small jobs. People invite you to their sets sometimes. Sometimes you get paid. Sometimes it's pro bono. But you're eager to learn. You want to see what's happening out there. So sometimes it's about word of mouth, sometimes what people see you do. But by the time I was finishing, I was already working.
Okay. And
then also, I got employed at NAFTI also because, so I was a good student, but also that NAFTI had just started operating the dubbing center, where there was a facility to help dub films into other languages.
Okay.
And at the time, because I could speak some French as well, and I did my national service and I worked at the center and we did a lot of work on some films. So that's how my entry into, before I was brought into faculty to teach and etc.
Sure.
So I've always been between teaching and practice. I've never left any. So when I was in school, I also worked with Shirley Frimpong Manso. First with her and Juliet on series, a reality show called Heart to Heart. Then eventually, we just with Shirley alone when she started Sparrow Productions and did majority of the journey with her. So we did the Miss Ghana's, we did Personalities Kitchen, we did Different Shades of Blue, we did,
so a lot.
So whilst I worked with her, I worked with NAFTI as well.
Okay.
It was always like that.
Understood. Okay, so I want to take a little bit of a veer because you decided to stay in academia, but you have this relationship with the Royal African Society in the UK. And so before getting into that for that film festival, I want to ask you why the where. So how did you come to be living, working, and playing where you currently are here in Accra? And where in Accra? Where is your Accra? And have you had journeys that have taken you out to come back?
Out of Accra?
Yes, or out of Ghana.
My journeys outside Ghana have always been short.
Okay.
So I would say that I am a Ghana chick.
Okay.
Yes, I have been in different parts of Accra. Currently, I live at Oyarifa.
Oyarifa, okay.
Yeah, that's where our old house is. But I've lived at Tantra Hills, behind the trade fair, all of that.
Okay.
I said I belong to the Ghana Academy of Film and Television Arts. And so for some time, they had this relationship, which they still do, with the Alliance Française, where we did this 2 to 3 years curating of largely Ghanaian films, but sometimes films from the continent, which was a monthly screening, which I curated and programmed, And then also, once upon a time, I had been jury chair for the Black Star International Film Festival here in Accra. I think it's first edition before my festival. So I should have started the Ndiva Women's Film Festival much earlier, but I had my own personal crisis and loss. My little sister had died, and so it took me a while to so I took
recover from that.
Oh, I'm still recovering. But so I put that on hold, and then I went to work on Black Star, and I realized, I could really hack this. So later I came back to my festival. And also, of course, there are 2 different festivals anyway. And then, of course, I've been around conferences, presented at other places, mixed a lot with other filmmakers and film people, whether they were festival directors or curators or programmers or people who run labs and things. So the circle is not too big.
Got it.
Because it's just not too big.
And also because the work is not easy. Right?
Actually, the work is not easy. Yeah. Money is always a problem.
Exactly.
And so people fall on favors sometimes, really. Because, if it was really about the money, we won't be here. Because for the work you do, nobody's able to pay you.
Right.
Yeah. So slowly, recommendations happened, and so that's how I got into Film Africa.
Okay.
And then also I did some work also in curation twice for the French embassy here.
Okay.
They tried to do a mini FESPACO in Ghana, and and then also so I was managing the European Film Festival as well. But of course I was on Film Africa even before starting EUFF. Okay. And also because I've run my own festival for a couple of years.
So you just kind of you're known as a film festival.
So also because I'm still a practitioner.
Sure, right. So you have those links as well.
Yeah, those links as well, and I seem to have something to say when it comes to film
and curating
quality of films, the craft itself, etc. And understanding the industry, and especially on the continent. So slowly that's how I came to curating and programming, and that's also a very tough one. Yeah, it's a very tough one because we work. So when I got on, there was me, there's someone from South Africa. Who was living in South Africa, because she's really not South African, but she's of African, Ethiopian and something. And then there's someone from Nairobi,
Okay, so it's very diaspora.
Extremely. Yeah. And then with the people from the Film Africa and then the Royal African Society. And so films are coming from everywhere. and then you're watching and deciding.
Right, a lot of time.
And there's a lot of politics, Sometimes you have to kill some darlings. You might really like a film, but when you look at the geopolitics, you're like, maybe if there are 10 films coming from Nigeria and there's none coming from other places, you want to say, okay, then let's see if we can take 5 and then distribute the other best 5.
Sure.
It can be...
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, but for me, it's fulfilling and exhilarating because there's a constant chance at engaging with the cinema from the continent and the continent's diaspora, and that people get the chance to watch things they probably would never have watched in their lifetime on normal television or cable, but also that cinemas or films that come from the continent and the continent's diaspora have a way of generating very serious conversations, comfortable and uncomfortable, from the themes, that are addressed, and how sometimes there's always so you're entertained, but there's also some self-reflection that happens. And also there are things that you know about that like they say that sometimes films can be a reflection of a people.
Yes.
Debatable, but there's some truth in that. And especially when we are working with the aesthetics of realism, But also that when it comes to Africa and her diaspora, the tensions that are there, the conversations we should be having that we probably haven't had, the engagements, and there's a way in which film brings all of this to bear, and how, like, I'll quote what the Zimbabwean novelist, she's called Yvonne Vera. There's a book titled, that's an anthology, not a book, an anthology of short short stories from African women writers. And in the foreword, she writes that African women write such that they kill non-performing gods and resurrect new ones, something like that. And I think the African cinema does that too, cinema from the continent and its diaspora.
Yeah.
Sometimes even for you who's watching as a programmer and all that, there are ways in which films hit you and speak to you and shake you and make you think about many things, and the different ways in which stories are told. And which makes you see that we can't continue to treat Africa as a homogeneous space. It's that Africa is a very complex space, and not in negative terms. But that is layered, There's some universal ways in which we see things and do things, But also that we come to the world in different ways, and so it can't do Africa as a country kind of thing.
Right.
Even just by the cinema,
Yeah.
Because many times there have been stories told about migration, belonging, home. But even if you saw something around that theme last year and you saw another film this year, it's not the same,
right? Yeah.
But yet, the theme may look the same, but the approach, the style, the way the story is told, the stories within the stories. So I keep saying that, like, you take a story up, you take the theme of migration, the way some people have presented the migration story, and if you see African filmmakers at their best presenting some of these stories, you'll be like, oh my God, I never thought this was also part of the migration story, because the migration story is so layered. Sometimes even the people who are left here, they're part of the migration story. It's not just about the person who is journeying.
Right.
And even in the journey, when Christiana Chu died, my husband said, this is a migration story. I was like, what? I said, yeah. I say, why would he have been in that place for the first? I mean, really,
yes, it's
what
true.
Was it? Really,
it's true.
Why was he there? Work, looking for
this opportunity to raise a family and not struggle,
and just get better and live a certain dream. And so he had to, because if the Ghana League was as good as the Premier League, why should he be in Turkey? Maybe he would still have gone to Turkey, but the circumstances may have been different. But I was like, a true story is another migration story.
It is.
You know?
Yeah.
So that's the power of, I mean, film itself as an art form is very powerful.
Yeah.
Because really calls on our emotions a lot, and what speaks to your emotions works faster and harder.
Exactly.
But also when you come to how we tell stories also on the continent, you know, the different ways in which we all tell our stories, and that the way we come to cinema. Some come as protests. Some come as education.
Yeah.
Some come as education, entertainment. Some come as getting you to be self-reflective. People come to film differently, and all of this at the end produces an experience you can't quantify.
Yes, that's true.
Oh, yes.
And as much as we try with the marketplace.
Yes,
but it's true.
Yeah.
Like, there's just so much more.
There's the experience you get, you know, so I think that's why I think I like being
the space.
In that space. And also because I teach film, it affords me the chance to also teach better and have certain conversations with my students that ordinarily they may not have the chance to have.
Yeah.
And get them to see the world differently.
Sure.
You know, totally differently. And also appreciate where they're coming from, but also know how far they can go, etc. So I think all of this makes me a 360 person. Yeah.
Okay. Speaking of 360, I want to ask you about Glocal Speak. So I think this is a great question for you as a filmmaker and someone who's on the pulse of young people and hearing just different things. So we want to hear what you hear. So I ask you to share a word, a phrase, or a saying that is a meaningful part of your local experience, and why or how you've come to value it as a Glocal Speak.
We move.
Okay. Yes.
Whatever it is, we move. And you find it also more in the film space as well, because it's a tough space.
Yeah.
Your heart will get broken many times. You will be wounded. You will be disappointed. You will lose. I think being in the space of film teaches you how to lose. I hope people are actually taking notes. But you will have to learn to lose. It's not a win-win every day for you. You lose a lot, and then you can also win a lot. But I hope people. But it's a place that makes, you know. So we keep saying we move, and in my, you know, space, because even when you hit down, when you're falling like 8 times, the 9th getting up is we move.
Yeah.
So it's a saying that.
Yeah, and I think that is kind of the nature of art, that doesn't always go the way it's planned,
never.
And it's a practice. And every day of practice isn't a successful day of practice. So, but you keep coming back. So, yeah, I like that sentiment. Okay, so let's talk about your latest project. So we've gotten you through into practice and working with students. And When Women Speak is kind of your ethic, right? It's a lot of who you are and a lot of how you've come to be. So tell us about the genesis of that project and your experience working with the collaborators and speaking with all of those historical figures.
When Women Speak is a child of one Professor Aseye Tamakloe before, and Professor Kate Skinner. At the time was Dr. Skinner. So there's this joke that Prof. Tamakloe always gives, and she says, so after Yasantua, then what? Then Beijing, then what? You know?
Yeah.
So the project, I think, started, I don't think with the film aim, but eventually film was pitched.
Okay, so it started as a research project?
It started as a research project, I think, in the very early conversation, but quickly there was a thinking of adding film. I mean, these two people are very forward-looking.
Sure.
And also, have come, even though they're academics, they have come to understand that knowledge production and sharing is not only in the
academy
text or the academy, you know. And also that if you want knowledge to go far and have a long lifespan, there are other mediums.
Yes.
And film is one of those mediums. And so immediately also film came to mind. So I am a student of Prof. Adomako, but also she's like another mother.
Okay.
And of course, she's known that I've been with film for a long time. She's attended some of my festivals, etc. Also, that I'm also a student of gender studies and women's studies, and I've always known that women's stories worldwide have been underrepresented. Number two, that there's an intentional writing out of history of women worldwide. You look at all the liberation movements from different countries, and there's no way that these people will say women were not part of the...
Yeah.
They've always been part of the revolution, but,
Yes.
there's always a mute, And then also that it was something that was very daring. I had not really ventured. Because this... I realized was going to be a lot of work.
Yeah, it's a big,
it's
a big endeavor. Yeah.
Big endeavor. We started from an outrageous number of 50 women.
You chose 50 because they all played a significant role in
different
times.
At different times. So the project itself is looking at challenging the conception that African women's activism is a Western concept, or it's a Western, acquired thing.
Yeah.
And so the project was to show that
we've been
doing this for so bloody damn long, if I'm allowed to say that, And also, that's one. Another part is also to fill a certain gap, historically, there's a gap when it comes to women's histories in Ghana, especially when you look at pre-independence, independence, work in public space, the different strands of activism that existed. People didn't really know about all of that. Yeah. So because Professor Skinner is a historian and Professor Abbeyquaye is a sociologist. So even I, who's the youngest in that group, know, out of the three, know that there's a gap.
Yeah.
Now, we obviously can fill the gap.
Right.
But we can poke at something or start something for others to,
to take on.
Yeah. And so there was a conversation about finding women who have been part of the different movements, women's movements, we call them, or women's organizing. Some women in public space, some women play the roles in
private sector, private business,
public sector, pre-independence, independence. So even though we have 16 women speaking in the film, if you critically look at the film, there were a lot more women. Yeah. In the film, and others got mentioned, etc., etc.
Yeah.
So all of this was the reason why the project took place, and we attempted to want to let people hear the life and work of these women through anecdotes, through narrations, through we did not have, and that's what we chose a style we did. We wanted the women themselves to speak their truth, whatever. We want them to say they should speak it themselves. And it actually works well with something that a professor in the University of, I think, Ireland, she's Cameroonian, but also has made some really good films on women as well. And she said this thing once that really resonated with me. She said when it comes to women's stories, especially from our continent, if it is not seen or heard,
it's forgotten.
It's almost delegitimized. It didn't
happen.
Yeah. So even though this thing should be normalized, right? But because it isn't, people have to see and hear so that you delegitimize, even though it should not be like that. But for now, we're crawling, so we'll take it as it is.
Yeah.
And I realized that it is true because even whether for young people or young women or whichever way. So if they can see these people, hear them, then they know it's doable. And also that it has been done.
Right.
So probably they don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Sure.
They can stand on shoulders and move.
Yeah.
But the truth is that people do not know the stories.
Exactly.
It's not in the history books, it's nowhere. And to know the amount of work that had been done and to also get some sort of self-worth, that these people didn't have to wait from these women didn't have to wait for some Western intervention to know that they need to get to the wheels and work, So you take FIDA, women graduate from law school and they start an association, and they've heard of the bigger association, but they start the Ghana chapter and slowly work things up. Some people are into mining, some people are into exports, non-traditional sector, people were into many things.
Yeah.
And then there was a legal side, and also the understanding of organizing to achieve success.
Right.
Because these things cannot be done by just single people, and you can't work in silos. And because it's women's issues, which like today we are still battling the menstrual tax. We should not be paying this amount of tax we are paying on sanitary pads. We have said it. Today when I was coming, I was thinking we really need to re-strategize and do something else. There's a way we have to threaten the people in power.
Sure.
We've gone beyond being diplomatic and polite and presenting statistics.
Maybe
we should say that we're going to remove our clothes like the Liberian women threatened before the whole thing was put together. Calling of Chastela, having a meeting, calling for a ceasefire, etc. Probably have to get there because really, it's really unfair.
It's very expensive.
And I cannot pay for biological something that I shouldn't be taxed for.
Right, exactly. That's going to do it for part 1 of my conversation with Aseye Tamakloe. Please be sure to catch us next week when we talk more about when women speak, as well as Asaye's interests, her reads, her watches, and her listens. As always, you can catch us with new episodes Tuesdays at glocalcitizenspod.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Please like, share, subscribe, tell a friend. It helps others find great content on the internet, and especially if you write us a review, particularly on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. That would be great. So until next time, bye for now.